It's been a while since Stormgate got out and is publicly available for everybody to play, but the numbers are, well, quite beyond the expectations both from the community and the devs themselves. So, the most important thing on the list for Stormgate fans now is one question. Will Stormgate be able to actually survive till the official out of early access release or not? To start things off, it's increasingly more obvious in hindsight what went wrong on the release date and why the numbers plummeted so much. When I first played this game in beta, I was extremely excited. Even though at that stage it was even more raw than it is today, I immediately fell in love with Stormgate's gameplay and how much it reminded me of StarCraft 2. While I have a lot of new RTS coming up and there are many amazing games, such as Age of Mythology as a recent example, I haven't really seen anything that competitive and that enjoyable, and something that just reminds me of StarCraft 2 as much as Stormgate does. From that point on, up until the recent months, I was pretty confident in the game, providing the devs give it more polishing. Unfortunately, they didn't. And I feel like the whole situation with its release brought a lot more controversy than it should have. There are a few things that I want to acknowledge in this video. I want to say I still strongly believe the game has a chance for a happy and prosperous future, and I know many people will say that I'm just coping really hard, but anyway, I'll try to explain the whole topic as best as I can. I have a strong feeling that Stormgate is the most underrated, poorly understood game that has been released recently, at least in the RTS genre. And funny enough, but I think the game suffered a lot mostly because of how the game was framed and brought to the players. The first issue is, the game has always been quite heavily sugar-coated by most content creators in the RTS space, and this includes myself as well, because I was kinda blinded by the gameplay and, I was maybe overhyped for this game, I gotta tell the truth. But I don't really remember people calling out on things that the whole community discussed prior to Stormgate's official release. And I gotta say though, everyone who played StarCraft 2 on a high level has this level of bias, and I used to be a Grandmaster Zerg player myself. I played in tournaments, I played this game quite a lot, I have more than 10k games in StarCraft 2 on a high level, so I do enjoy this game more than many average gamers because it scratches this competitive itch really well, and this is probably why many pro players think so high of Stormgate. However, it's a bit bizarre to look at the game state now and then recall all the positivity that surrounded Stormgate for so much time. This is a bit of a problem because it's harder for the devs to navigate and adapt to the audience desires when many people are just overly positive about the game when it's in development, and then these are the same people who are not even playing it anymore. And I think everybody in the community should be more open about how they feel about any game they play. Currently, it seems there is this level of positivity that just kinda prohibits any reasonable criticism, and many concerns are just brushed off as if they are unimportant, and here we are having a game with a player base lower than almost any other RTS game right now. And this is quite bizarre that nowadays you can almost never really trust the critics, because well, they are too compassionate, apparently, and too hopeful for every single project that comes out. Like, seriously, let's just take a look at IGN, because they gave Concord 7 out of 10 for a game that closed down in 2 weeks and got out of the market, and this is the fastest and record-breaking failure of a game in the history. And by the way, they also gave 7 to Stormgate. Is this a really low score for IGN, or I don't get something? And for extra comparison, a Black Myth Wukong, which sold over 1 million copies, has 8 from IGN. So the distance between a complete flop and a super successful game is only 1 point. I believe it's important to frame the demands properly, especially when it comes to free-to-play games and early access, because it's really crucial to hear all the complaints and adjust to them. And look, it's not like Stormgate can't get better. Later in this video I'll explain why it still can't be the best RTS ever. I know that's a very ambitious claim, but still, just take a look at Amara's rework or a new graphic upgrade which makes the game look massively better. So it's really possible. However, with all of that being said, I think the game is being criticized way too harshly, and believe it or not, it's not because Stormgate is god-awful. I think quite the contrary. It's a decent RTS game that is just very, very unpolished up to this day. And partly this hateful response is the fault of the marketing and the expectations that they set for Stormgate. Considering what they released in early access, it's really hard to call this game a AAA RTS or a new generation of RTS gaming. It's also painful to compare it to StarCraft 2 or Warcraft 3, two games where the most players come from. A successor to such giants should be standing on their shoulders, not lying around their feet. It feels to me this is the biggest reason for such a negative response. The expectations were set way too high for Stormgate Early Access, and this is just one big miscommunication that happened. Another problem is that Stormgate is trying to catch three birds with one stone. Starting with the campaign, I mean, there is really no reason to rush this thing in that state, and even though the level design, the gameplay and the missions are quite fun, it could have been much better if the devs let themselves cook for another year or so. The same could be said for co-op, which just doesn't provide that much replayability yet. And as for 1v1 versus, they don't even have enough time to fix the freaking dogs meta and all other balance issues that are coming up. I honestly believe it would have been much better if they did it brick by brick, starting with 1v1, then co-op, then campaign, or in any other order that they would prefer. And now, in October, they are looking forward to releasing a team mode, and well, is it really gonna be ready this time though, or is it gonna be unpolished too? This state of the game and rushed release is what also led to a lot of doom posting on Reddit and other platforms. This gave an impression that the devs are actually running out of money, and it's a big problem for the image of Stormgate. Let's be crystal clear. Despite some statements on Reddit from some users, we cannot really speculate on the amount of money Frost Giant has and how they are dealing with its financial planning, because we don't have the full picture and we could all be wrong. And of course, a company has multiple ways of bringing in extra money. They can take loans, for example, but you know, let's not dive into the numbers and data. That's not the point of this whole thing. But the fact that this discussion is already happening and people are genuinely afraid that Stormgate might not have enough cash for a full release is a very bad sign, because many online games nowadays work like a banking system in a way that if everybody is pulling out, the whole system crashes and newcomers aren't coming in. And if you expect that a game might die in a few months, why would you waste your time getting good at it, saying nothing about spending money in it? But despite all the things I just said, I would still claim that this game has nice chances to recover from all the damage done. Despite the low numbers, the only real threat is time. How much do they still have to work with this game before it actually becomes profitable? Other than that, we've already seen some great attempts to fix the game, as with graphics update or adding new maps and new content and so on. To me, the reason why this game failed is simple.
It's fucking love!
But still, I'm a bit shocked by how such a big chunk of the community got deterred from it immediately after playing it, because to me it looks like a game that still should be in the development. And this is not a bad thing, because, well, there is a big difference between a game that's just boring and bad and dull at its core, and the game that's just unfinished. I strongly believe that Stormgate falls into the second category, and in my other videos I talked about why I like this game, and mostly it comes down to gameplay, the mechanics, the combos, the maps and so on. And in my opinion, the game has a nice skeleton with just very little meat on it, and that's how I would put it. Very often I heard the criticism that Stormgate just doesn't have a coherent vision of what this game should be, and that's why it's doomed to fail. I gotta disagree on that, because it's really hard to tell yet with the amount of stuff that's been shown, because, well, there's just not that much stuff to look at, right? You know, things may change quite a lot. I know people like to draw a comparison between StarCraft 2 Beta and Stormgate, but to be honest, I would rather compare Stormgate to StarCraft 2 Alpha or whatever that version was. Now imagine that if StarCraft 2 was rushed too and released in that state, even if it was free to play, would you still play it? So in my opinion, the core problem with Stormgate numbers is that the game has little to offer at the moment. There is just not that much content to stick around. If you're not grinding ladder, by this time you should have already moved on and probably sitting on the bench waiting for a new patch to come out if you're still a fan. And this is why I don't think it's reasonable to compare Stormgate to games like Age of Mythology, because, well, the latter just has a ton more content to it. Even though Stormgate is free to play, there's just not that much that you can do inside the game itself, not even custom maps or modes to stick around, right? And no way to play with friends except for co-op. This is why I think it's too early to doompost about Stormgate. It's really hard to tell whether a lot of people dislike the game or it's because there is not enough content. I consider this second option as the biggest reason. The real question is, can the devs still save the game from this situation? I know you probably heard about such examples in the gaming industry, games like No Man's Sky, which utterly failed at the release and then over time rebuilt its reputation brick by brick, and now it's a good thing. But I would say there is another example that's much closer to Stormgate, and it's Company of Heroes 3. Company of Heroes 3 was also a rushed release that also crushed the game's reputation immediately. Company of Heroes had lots of content unlike Stormgate though, but everything in it was unpolished and even raw, from a campaign that was buggy and lacked a lot of content and replayability, to voice lines, balance, maps, graphics, almost everything. Unlike the previous title, Company of Heroes 2, this game was not a big success and the devs decided to rebuild and improve the game over the course of the next, well, almost 2 years already. This gave positive results and the game now looks and feels much better, and the average and peak numbers of players are rising with every patch. So there is still hope. So in conclusion, I hope Stormgate will be able to follow these examples and there is still a chance to make the most epic and brilliant comeback in the game dev history. However, it's only up to the developers themselves at this point to match the high expectations that they set some time ago. They're all talented, great people, and I hope they'll get back on track and make this game really amazing. With that being said, they should also listen to criticism more and actually respond to it, I guess, and possibly rearrange some of their priorities, and things like balance patches should not be taking 2 months to happen. And that's it for today. What do you think about Stormgate's future? Thank you for watching, check out our other content about this game, and as usual, have a nice day and see you next time.